All right. So we'll be going through a few things today. These are not Microsoft-centric technologies. These are actually things you can do today for your loved ones, your friends, your neighbors, that are just simple things. Technology can aid in some of these things, and I'll go through some of those. But these are lessons that I've learned. By way of introduction, I've been here at Microsoft a really long time. I work in our security division. I work on threat protection today. So I have a mindset of how to do protection for basically any age. But really, again, this is not about the particular Microsoft products that might aid in this. This is about simplifying things. This is about protecting identity and passwords. And then I would say the easiest way to think about a lot of this is always assume scam. And that's something that you'll have to talk to your family and loved ones about this, is to always assume scam, because our actors, threat actors are getting really, really good at enticing, especially the more vulnerable folks like our elders, into some of these scams. Um, so I also have a lot of experience in this with my family members, as well as I have had a small business for almost the last 30 years, where I help small businesses, I help my neighbors, I help nonprofits with their small IT needs. And so over the last few years, I've really been helping my neighbors. And we were talking at the beginning of this with some of our leadership here in this group, that I do help a lot of my elderly neighbors. It's a very mixed community here. And so I've experienced some crazy stuff as far as how they take care of their security, and actually been there when things have actually happened. And so I've tried to kind of unravel those. So I've been exposed probably more than most to some of these things that are helping or happening to our elderly. Um, I will be introducing a couple avatars here in a second, that I'll use a couple examples. One of them is, and the names have been changed to protect the innocent, or guilty in this case, Walt, who's a little bit on the younger side, still kind of in the workforce. He's getting ready to retire. He's still somewhat tech savvy and really holds me accountable for the things that I help him implement from a Wi-Fi perspective, or from a audio video perspective, where he really wanted to get rid of kind of his cable provider and go to streaming apps and save some money. That's why I met him, and I was actually there when he was scammed, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. The other is Bob. He is a little bit further in age. He's retired military, had a very high clearance at a defense industry based company, really kind of losing that tech savviness that he used to have. And that's okay. I think everyone needs to recognize that as you get older, and you go into retirement, keeping up with some of these things is a hassle. And you just don't want that hassle anymore. And so we'll talk about simplification here in a second. That's really kind of improved there with Bob. Um, he's almost been scammed multiple times, and there is, I'll talk about this here in just a little bit around email and what happens as you get retired. You focus more on the things that are right in front of you, and some of those things might just be your email, and you want to know everything that goes into your junk mail, and you start to get angry when you start to get these crazy things, and you start to reply to things, which makes it even worse. So we'll talk about that here in a minute, but that's really what we're facing. I do want to say one thing here, that because I've been through so many of these things, my humor, and the way I talk about these things is just kind of for my sanity's sake. It is not meant to be, derogatory towards our elders or anything like that. So if you kind of get that sense, please forgive me, because that's just how I have to deal with this, whether that be my own family or my neighbors. Um, so the first thing I want to talk about here is simplification. Um, there is no way that even any of us keep up with all of these technology needs. And as you age, it gets to be even more difficult. The first thing that I would highly recommend is, as a family, standardize on a technology ecosystem. Either that is iOS with Apple, you can throw Macs in there as well, or Android, because you will need to be a support team around these loved ones and these elders, and that means the daughters and the sons and the grandkids and so on. If you're all on one platform, there are a lot of tools that allow better sharing between those, and also controls that I'll talk about here in just a couple bullets. The other thing is parental controls. Now, this sounds like something you do for your kids, but it works for my parents as well. So parental controls can span both the early in life and the later in life folks. And you can actually use those controls to help prevent installation of rogue apps and maybe even screen time and things like that. It really works well if you think about it a little bit deeper on aging parents. The one thing that you do want to teach your elders is get down to a small amount of apps. If you imagine an iPhone and you're having to scroll like 6 times because there's so many apps installed, it is overwhelming, confusing, and frustrating because they will never find their apps. And by the way, most folks don't scroll down like I do and start typing in the name of the app and go to it. They literally will scroll back and forth, and then you will get a support call because you are their tech support. So if you can really scale down the number of apps that they work with, whether those be banking apps or even Netflix or whatever, get to a very small number of apps, and it's much more manageable for you as their tech support, and it's much more manageable for them that they're not overwhelmed. In iOS, there is something called screen time. These also can restrict their app store purchases. There is a vector that is happening now that there are a lot of apps that look like the true one, but they're named very similar, and they're just done by regular developers. Things to control TVs and to control things in your house. There's one that's from the manufacturer, and then there's a bunch of other ones. You want to just use the one from the manufacturer because you don't really know what those other things are going. And so if you can control those so that they can't install the other ones, they really don't have that concept of an app can actually be a scam. So I would highly recommend kind of locking down what they can do, and iOS screen time is one of those things. On the Android side, there is digital well-being, parental controls, and Google Family Links that have some of those same things. It's a little bit different. I'm not an Android user, so we decided long ago that Apple was the way that we could help manage some of those things, but those are out there. Now, there's probably a lot of geeks on this call today here. We've got some amazing mobile device management tools. I would not say that I have actually deployed those, although I technically could. But we do have products within Microsoft's portfolio like Intune and others that can help do some of these things. But that is a heavy, heavy lift to go get a tenant, get the licenses, and actually manage those. But just know that we do have some of those. And then the last thing here is also just think about the other technologies that are in the house. These are maybe Sonos devices for, speaker systems, lighting controls, how many Wi-Fi pods and mesh they have around the house, you name it. Those are all things that can and will go wrong. And again, you are the tech support here. So the better you can kind of streamline these maybe to mainstream products that are very reliable and very well supported, the better, because these will become a source of friction. It will become frustrating when the light bulb on the porch will only turn on red when you had actually programmed it to kind of be like a nice warm yellow. And you will constantly have to fix these things because it's just beyond the abilities of normal users to go in and fix these things. So an overall reduction in technology is a good thing. These are very proactive measures. You have to get ahead of this, or you will pay the price later when you actually have to support these things. And there are potential breaches because something was bought and it wasn't updated and someone got into the network, and it can get nasty very quickly. So again, just think about these things, about the bare minimum of what can actually be supported by you remotely, as well as those it adds value to their lives rather than just technology for the sake of technology. I will also say, we were again talking at the very beginning here, things like remote controls for TVs. If there's 2 or 3 of them sitting out on the coffee table in front of the sofa, bad idea. Get to one remote. There's lots of solutions for those. I wouldn't say go invest in a $400, ultimate remote that will do everything. Actually look at other things like a Roku or a Fire TV or an Apple TV that basically brings all those things together. And to be honest, cable providers, satellite providers like Xfinity or DirecTV, a lot of those remotes are super simple, and it actually has apps like Netflix built into those. Those greatly reduce the amount of dependencies on technology. So highly recommend them. If you're going to cut the cord and you don't want a cable provider, then look at some of those sticks that plug in the back of that, and it's a single remote that turns on and off the TV, and it changes the volume and it mutes things. So again, these are all things that, while they're not directly security related and fraud related, they may become that, and they may become overwhelming. And then there's resentment towards technology, that when you do tell them, hey, you got to do something with your password specifically, they're already hating the technology and they won't listen. So getting ahead of this and making this more graceful is the key. And then let's talk about Bob here. That's a funny movie. That's a good movie too. Bob struggles with Sonos. He has had some issues with automating of the lights, where they used to want to, hey, we want these lights to come on at certain times, and then when they don't, he gets very frustrated. And again, I've now simplified this, and an on and off light switch is great, or a motion detection type light is better than something that has a remote, box that's connected to the Wi-Fi that, is a smart device that turns things on. I will just tell you, this has helped out a lot, and he's much more receptive now to listening to the technology tips that I give him, because he doesn't hate the technology anymore. I will also say that one thing that Bob has been prone to is he constantly gets emails from Norton, McAfee, you name it, that his subscription has expired, or, hey, you are now vulnerable to threats. These are really kind of those, let's scare someone, especially our elderly, into a subscription model, when in reality, Microsoft Defender is already probably on his PC, and it does great, and they really don't need those additional things unless you feel that there's a risk of, hey, we can't trust them with their credit score or their credit cards. Let's make sure there's some kind of monitoring system there. But in most cases, that extra $50 or more a month that they would be spending on those, don't, again, have a conversation here about assume scam, run things through you before you actually sign up for subscription. So just wanted to give a little bit more of a profile of Bob that will keep evolving as I go through this. Identity and passwords. This is the most important thing that we'll talk about today. The challenge here, especially as you age, is you love the familiar. And you've probably had the same AOL or Hotmail account for 30 years when you're talking to an elder. They don't want to change that. It is their identity by all definitions of the word. The problem is they probably have the same 3 passwords associated with every single login they've done over those 30 years. So it's a matching key, right? It is an email address, and then there are 3 different passwords, one that's super complex, one that's kind of complex, and one that they don't care about. That's typically what we find. The key here is we need to think of getting rid of passwords. And that is a super scary, loaded, thing to talk about. But the reason that we have to talk about this is MFA, or multi-factor authentication, is an important aspect of this. In most cases, when you sign up for anything these days, it's going to say, what's your phone number? We're going to text you a code to verify who you are, or it's going to send you something in an email. Those are great. However, not everything has MFA. And so if a hacker can get this email address that's probably pretty well known and has been part of dozens and dozens of breaches, and a password that really hasn't changed over 30 years, these bad guys can start hitting, let's see if I can get into Netflix. Let's see if I can get into their bank account. Let's see. And so this pair is really, really the keys to the kingdom. And so we need to get everyone, us included, and not just our elders, with a different password for every single app, every single login. That sounds like a very daunting task, but here's the saving grace. There's a bunch of products now baked into either iOS or Android or even third parties that allow you to sync those passwords across your devices. So you can see on the screen here, the Passwords app used to be called Keychain in iOS. Google has Password Manager. Microsoft makes a great one called Authenticator that we all know and love because we probably have to use it when we're creating a new machine or even signing in sometimes to check our email when we're on vacation in a weird place. And then there's others that are third parties that are like 1Password, LastPass, Nord makes one, and so on. These are super important because when it detects a sign-in into an app or into a website, it will suggest a complex password. And I used to think like, I don't want a complex password. I got to remember that. But what it's actually suggesting is I'm going to create a different password for every app and every website. And I'm probably preaching to the choir at this point, but I guarantee you many of the people on the phone today are still using their main email address and probably 3 different passwords. That or your significant other is probably doing the same and they haven't gotten out of that mode. And I still struggle with this today that, my wife logs into a bunch of different things for her business. And then I see her actually typing in her password. I'm like, we just talked about this. You should be using Password Manager. But sometimes it's easier. And, sometimes you hit those sites and you try and put a complex thing in it. It says, you can only use certain characters. Luckily, a lot of those have said change the makeup of that, and then it'll save it. These are super important. The problem with this, as you transition an elder to this, they are going to hate this. They are going to hate you. They are going to hate everything about this for like the next 3 weeks until they actually get used to it. I will say the other thing here is these are shareable now. So a lot in the passwords, if you haven't kind of explored that app in iOS, you can now create groups. And so one of those, you can share with your significant other and create, hey, these are our bank account ones. These are the Netflix logins or whatever. And you don't need to text them this complex password like you used to so that they could also have it saved in their passwords. You can actually share those. I do this with my kids as well. They're in different parts of the world and they, I probably shouldn't say this. We share the Netflix account, we share the Paramount account, we share the Spotify account. And so I don't have to keep sending them that. They can actually just pull it up on their phones and log in with this complex password. So this is the concept. If you come out of this with nothing else, is you need to get to having complex or unique passwords for every single site and every single login. Again, this won't be easy. This is something that you're going to have to revisit over and over and over again, because chances are your elders are storing these on sticky notes that are somewhere in their office. They are going to pull out a notebook that they've saved every password they've ever used, and it's written down, and they're going to search for it and say, well, what is it? Or they're going to save it in like a notes app without a password, that if someone got on their phone, they'd have every single password they've ever used. So this is super critical. These are stored in a secured place on your phone. The biggest thing is they require biometrics to actually access them. So it's going to scan your face or it's going to scan your finger. And that's an important aspect that you talk through with your elders, that this isn't just putting in some random password and it's unprotected. Every single time they will have to multi-factor authenticate, if you will, with biometrics in order to get to that password. And that's what actually makes them safe. The other thing that I wanted to talk about real briefly is a lot in Android and iOS, they have added some additional things. And it's not the most pleasant thing to think about, but if someone were to have a health issue and you needed to access something on their phone, or God forbid they pass away, they now have things called recovery contacts and legacy contacts on the phones. Make sure those get filled in so that someone else can actually have access, because it's very hard to sometimes gain access to bank accounts and things like that once someone has passed. Just something to think about. Not my favorite topic, but those are now enabled in most of these devices. Let's talk about Walt for a second in a real world example here. Again, Walt is my neighbor. I was there installing stronger Wi-Fi so that we can install Roku sticks on the back of every TV so that he could get rid of his cable provider and move to something like YouTube TV or Tubi or one of those. I'm there behind a TV, fishing things through, getting things set up, and I hear a gasp from Walt's wife in the kitchen. And of course, life goes on for them. I'm just there. I'm the techie guy pulling wire, right? And I start hearing the conversation, and I start kind of hearing a heated conversation of, oh my God, 70,000 miles are gone from our United account. I was just trying to book our vacation for the summer. So I hear this, and I'm like, whoa, that seems kind of weird. Maybe they did some. And then it gets deeper and deeper into the conversation. Turns out someone logged into their airline account and stole 70,000 air miles and immediately converted them to gift cards. And so they said, hey, can you come help us with this? We know you're just here for a wire, but we're happy to pay you to try and sort this out. And so I start looking at it. And the way this happened was they used the same credentials for every single site. And they literally brought out the folder from the cupboard that had every single password they've ever used. And of course, it's the same email address that they've used for 30 years. Someone got into their Netflix account where MFA was not enabled. And by the way, MFA was not enabled on this airline account. And so this actor basically just started trying different websites. And luckily, they didn't get into financial institution type stuff. But I started looking down this page of passwords, multiple pages of passwords, and I'm like, oh my God, if they hit the right combination of the website or the app with this, they're in, and they're just going to start taking all your stuff. So we found out that their Netflix got hit by someone in Sweden, changed a bunch of settings, actually changed the password. We got it recovered. They got their air miles back. They ended up talking to the carrier and got them back, and the carrier said, oh, this is a pretty common scam. We know how to do it. Just, here's what you fill out. But immediately I had the conversation with them of, are you familiar with how you can save and use complex passwords on your phone? And that led to probably 3 weeks of iterations of me coming back and seeing how they were doing, maybe an hour or two, to just ensure that they were doing what they needed to. Now, Walt is still pretty tech savvy, caught this right away. He's like, this is a great idea. Walt's wife hated me. She probably still hates me at this point, even though I play pickleball and stuff in the same league as them and so on. But I can see the scowl on her face, like, you're the one that now I have to learn how to do all this technical stuff and I have to learn how to do the passwords. Believe me, I feel a lot better that I've actually inflicted that pain a little bit and they're learning how to cope with it. In the end, they started using 1Password because while they're kind of an Apple family, their computers are Apple, and their devices are, their kids are not, and their kids have to share some of those passwords with them, especially around some of the subscription services. So one of the kids said, "Oh, I didn't know you were doing complex passwords. Let's set this up." So they pay for 1Password, I think it was, and now they share it with the family. So just know that this happens and it will happen. The best way to get rid of this potential vector is to get them more familiar with complex passwords and have the device save all those things. Now, there is a little bit of a nuance here about, is the web browser saving it or is it the actual app in the devices? Because Google can actually save those things or Edge can save those things. You have to teach them, hey, you actually want the computer to save it or the app in iOS. And that might mean when you change a password, don't change it on your Windows device. Go change it on your iPad because you want it to sync up, because they're probably not using their Windows device that isn't part of that ecosystem as much as they're sitting in front of the TV with their iPads and their iPhones. Bob here, Bob is a little bit more resistant to these things, and he stores things in his Notes app on his iPad. He just will not use the password manager. And so it's just kind of reinforcement all the time with Bob. He uses it more than not, but sometimes it's a little painful and he doesn't quite understand it. So just know this isn't kind of a one and done. This is a constant refresh that you'll have to talk them through. Applications. Okay, so email real quick. Again, most of these email addresses have been around for 30 years. They are very entrenched in that. They're very familiar with that. They do not want to change it. But I will say that not every email system is great at filtering the scams, the threats, the malware. I would say Microsoft does an okay job. I would say Gmail does an okay job. But even some of the older legacies, they're actually not as good. But the idea here is if we could actually clean up what hits their email box before it hits it, there's not a vector where they're actually going to click on stuff. And so for Bob, who is kind of my problem elder, again, he's 80. He doesn't have a whole lot else going on. Yes, he goes and works out and spends some time with friends and stuff. But he just loves to go through his inbox and go through the junk mail folder and like, oh, this looks like pretty serious. I should click on this when it's a total scam. And there's warnings in there around, hey, your Netflix has expired, your credit card is overdrawn or whatever, and they're all just complete scams. Well, what I took the drastic measure of, and again, we have a bunch of geeks on the phone here, so maybe this might work for you, is I actually created a domain for him. I bought something that's very short, is related to his name in Microsoft 365 using my Microsoft discount, which I think is like $30 a year for a business account. And I forward all his old MSN.com stuff to this business account, and it has cut down the noise by 99.9%. So he doesn't even get the ability to click on anything because it isn't even in his junk mail. It's not anymore. We just do a lot better job, I think, on the business side. And I would say that is the extremity. Not everyone has to do that, but it is a potential kind of nuclear option, if you will, for folks that just can't kind of help themselves. The other ones you can forward around. So if the primary email address is like Gmail, You could forward it to an Outlook.com, in which case it kind of gets double scanned. And then, it's a much cleaner. However, just know that email has something called replyability. So if it's actually sent to @gmail.com, it's forwarded to Outlook.com and they try and reply, it doesn't match. And sometimes those will get rejected. If you do it on Microsoft's system and it was Hotmail, MSN, Outlook, there's probably a few other kind of older names. If you forward that to something in our cloud, the replyability still works because we've actually unified consumer and business together. And so they won't actually, get denied by some other system because SPF records and stuff like that match. So anyway, not the option I would recommend for everyone, but it works really, really well for us. And we've really cut down on the number of things that Bob has clicked on. The biggest thing here is just assume scam. So the teachings for your elders is pay no attention to the Netflix warning that just came through. Pay no attention to the Chase bank card that just came through. If you really are concerned that something bad is happening, it's expired, or someone's charged something on your credit card, go to the actual app and look for the notification there. Do not click on anything ever in an email. Do not click on anything ever in a text message. Assume they are all scams and go to the actual heart of where that is, and that is their web page, that is their app, and actually look for the warnings there. That is very very harsh, but that is where we are at these days because the scams are getting better and better and better. Things aren't misplaced. The logos don't look weird anymore. Things are spelled correctly. Just assume scam and go right to the heart of where you get that information from. And one thing to iterate is please teach our elders that Microsoft, Google, Visa, the IRS, the toll company is not going to call you to collect money. These are very common things, and Bob has actually been subject to this, where he actually got a phone call and was sitting in the parking lot at the grocery store ready to buy some gift cards. Again, Bob is a little bit further along than most, and this is just kind of what life is these days. So again, it's a teaching moment. All these things you have to continue to reiterate with our elders. Please do not reply to junk messages. Getting angry and saying, take me off this list is not going to do anything. In fact, it's going to validate your email address. And then that gets sold to the next people saying, hey, this is a real one. Let's, charge more for that. And also look for unsubscribes. Unsubscribe is not a great way to cut down on that email. That might take you to a very bad place as well. And again, this might be lessons to everyone here. I talked about this before, trusted apps. There's a lot of lookalikes in the app stores. If you can, when you share an app with someone, especially, our elders, you can actually go into the app and actually share the link and text it to them. And so they click on that rather than trying to hunt it down in the app store. Location sharing, this is just, hey, limit it to while you're actually using the app. You don't want to create paper trails on a bunch of things. This hasn't really been a huge security issue, but someone is building information about you out there. It might be Google, it might be Microsoft. Better to just kind of leave this, hey, I'm only going to use this location while I'm actually using the app. Social media, Instagram is a highlight reel, so only believe that people's lives are only that good when they're actually posting on Instagram. Everyone goes through struggles, and so you can't. This is, again, just something to teach to our elders, is they think this is the only things that happens in people's lives is these highlights. They went on a trip, birth of a new kid or whatever. They almost get jealous of what others their same age are doing because that's actually what's on there. And it's a very hard thing, a nuance to comprehend, but just know that, like, Instagram especially is a highlight reel. But other social media, whoever is posting that, just assume it's a scam and go verify it independently from sources that you know. It's the same type of mentality around the email coming in. Don't trust what's in the email. Actually go to the app and actually look at what's there. Social media is the same way. Just because a friend posted it doesn't mean that it's the real thing. Go to a trusted news source, and don't procreate this like, hey, I'm going to repost this, and hey, did you see this, and so on. This is a hard one, because as you age, this is where you get your news from, and this is what the interesting things are that you talk to your family or your neighbors about. But just know, probably 50% of the stuff you're reading is complete garbage, or there's a nuance to it. And so go try and find a source. These are things to teach your elders so that they don't fall into some of these traps. And I think I shared, Bob here. He's just bored. It's just, this is what he does every day. And we've had to have a couple talks about him reposting things, even on Facebook, that are controversial or political or whatever. He thinks that it's a very small community that's seeing, when it's actually hundreds of his friends. And so just this awareness and this reinforcement with him has really cut down on the things that he posts there. So that's pretty much the content that I wanted to cover today. I wanted to just wrap up with something you could potentially just kind of print out that are kind of the highlights of what I talked about here. Again, this isn't technology driven. This is very much reinforcement. It's simplifying, and spending time with your elders to reinforce these things. But it simplify is the thing to get ahead of. Eventually there will be frustrations, and so the more you can get ahead of that, the less you'll be tech support, the less there will be this anger towards technology, which makes them resistant to paying attention to the things they really need to pay attention to. Protect identity. Multi-factor is great, but the biggest thing there is to transition to a password manager where you basically create a silo around every single identity you shared with an application or a website, so that someone can't use the same credential to get into multiple. And then assume scam. Never click on anything in an email or a text messages is the primary message there. And then everything on social media needs to be fact checked. And also just recognition that the AI pictures, videos, deepfakes is real. What you see out there is not necessarily what's actually happening. So again, some fact checking there, and a healthy suspicion that things are not as they seem is something to drive into our elderly. So with that, I haven't looked at the chat because I would be completely distracted. I'm a bit of a completionist, and so I'd be reading those instead of presenting here. So I'll take a look at those in a second, but happy to take questions. We got some time here, or even just commiserate with some of the stories that you may have in this area.
Hey, Marcus, one of the questions we had is how can we create a support system within our families to regularly check on security and well-being of the elderly loved ones?
Set up an MBR, a monthly business, thing like we do here at Microsoft, that you can go through those. And honestly, every time I'm asked to go over, to my in-laws or to go see my mom or wherever, I do kind of do like a mini security review and actually watch how they interact on their phone, or how they are turning on a TV or whatever, just to kind of get that, okay, where are we at these days? But you do have to talk to other loved ones that help support that family member. Might be a brother or a sister, or even neighbors that are maybe a little bit younger. It is a community effort of reinforcement, because I don't know what it is, but as you get older, you get a little bit more resistant to people telling you what to do. as well as you become, hey, I know what I'm doing. And there's a pride that happens. You went through your entire life of all these trials and tribulations and financial things, and you're finally at a point where, hey, you can relax and no one is going to tell me what to do, is really the attitude that I sense a lot of times. And so if you get a community of folks around them that are constantly assessing where they're at and teaching the same things, I think that's the only way you can kind of do that MBR each month, because it's not just one person saying it, it's multiple people saying that.